Hey, what's up, everybody? We're gonna take a minute here for people to trickle in. So we'll take a second, but in the meantime, would appreciate if you guys blew the chat up with who you are, where you're from, and kind of what you do. Would love to see where we're getting people coming in from today, and then we'll get it started here in a second. Hit us in the chat. All right, getting a big crowd today. This is exciting. We got like almost 100 people in here right now. Cool. Well, I'm going to dive right into it, folks. Thanks for being here today. Unracked is a live conversation series from Bridge Athletic. Bridge provides coaching tools to world-renowned organizations like the Philadelphia Eagles, Naval Special Warfare, the University of Arizona, and Westside Barbell. They provide those very same tools for coaches like me and you to use in our communities to deepen the training experience. Unracked is a free educational series Bridge puts on to break down the training systems, methods, and philosophies that drive performance at the highest level. Each episode takes you inside a specific approach, how it's built, how it's applied, and how it evolves under real world conditions. Today's guest is the Associate Athletic Director of Sports Performance at the University of Arizona. He oversees the department's strength and performance staff as well as the nutrition department. Additionally, he works directly with Wildcats baseball and indoor volleyball programs. Jim Krumpos and his staff design and implement year-round training focusing on movement, strength, power, and sport-specific energy system development. Jim, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So I know when we were kind of talking about, what we wanted to chat through with the episode, there was a story we kind of uncovered where you're at the University of Miami working with a particular sport coach there, and you mentioned how important the relationship is between strength and sport coach. And I figured we'd start there for today. Kind of tell us that story and what you kind of learned from that step in your career.
Yeah, thanks. I would say that that's the biggest thing that I've been trying to work with young strength coaches, work with my staff the last 5 years is really like you can know all the things, but you have to have a great relationship with the sport coach. You have to have a great relationship with your athletes, and you got to be able to work in both those realms. I've seen a lot of great, um, really knowledgeable people with a great skill set, but they get caught up. And butt heads with the sport coach, and they're miserable. The sport coach isn't happy, even though the KPIs might be good, even though the team is winning. I've seen sport coaches be unhappy with their
Mm,
strength and conditioning coach, and leading
mm,
to, at this level, then I'm constantly having to deal with those situations and be back and forth where like a lot of this just has to be come from that relationship. And I tell all my young strength coaches like it takes a year. It takes a year of building a relationship with these coaches. You got to go through an in season, you got to go through an off season, you got to go through the ups and downs and the conditioning and what the coach wants. And there's always a way to get done what the coach wants and also what is best for the athletes. And the story that we were talking about was, I got to University of Miami. I'm training men's basketball there, and the first week there, Coach Larinaga wanted me to have everybody. We're going to run the mile. We're going to run the mile, and I hadn't ran a mile with a team in years. But obviously want to impress the coach and keep them happy. And he had just hired me, and it's a little bit different situation there where you really kind of just work for the coach. And I said, okay, coach, like I just said, we're going to do it. And, started with the guys and got them out there and kind of, was letting coach know like, hey, there's some things that can happen with power production and those type of things. But, and, he didn't care about that. He's a little bit old school,
mm,
greatest dude ever, greatest coach ever. And so I was like, all right, we're going to run this mile. And my goal was to try to get us done with that mile as fast as I could in the off season so that we could move on to more sports specific training.
mm,
And so we got it done in a couple months. Actually, I think about 6, 7 weeks. Everybody had passed their times. I can't remember what it was, like 5:30 for guards and under 6 for posts. And we got out of that with very little stress reaction issues. And the whole off season, I just spent time researching like how running a mile is counterproductive to energy production and leads to these stress issues and all of these things. And I was researching it. But at that same time, I was just working day to day with coach and just getting to know him as a person. And it's almost like dating, right? Like, you're going to have a much different relationship with somebody after you've dated them for a year. You get to know them. You've gone through the things. Um, and we finally get through the season. And I said, Coach, I want to meet with you. I want to discuss, our conditioning test. I want to change it up. And he said, sure, let's talk about it. And I came prepared with this meeting with 5 months worth of data and articles and all that, and was really going to take a stand and walk into the meeting and was like, Coach, listen, I want to get away from the mile. I want to do some shuttle testing and some court link testing for the conditioning stuff. And because I had built that relationship with him, because he trusted me, because I had kept the guys healthy and improved their KPIs and those type of things, he's like, oh yeah, that's fine. There was zero pushback at all. Something that a year prior, he was digging his heels in. Once I built a relationship and built that trust, he's like, that's fine. Take it. That's your area. And we never did the mile again. And I think that I just like
Yeah.
to use that as an example of, once these coaches trust you, and see that you're on the same page with them, see that you're helping them get to where they want, they're going to give you a lot more autonomy in your area. Because I think that's a big, I think, struggling point for a lot of strength coaches is they have all this knowledge, right? They have master's degrees. They have all this knowledge. They've been in the trenches. They know how to develop. And the sport coaches ultimately in the college level have a lot of input, if not ultimate say on what they're doing. And that's where that people butt heads and people get frustrated in the college realm. And I think you have to change your mindset and really learn how to build relationship with these coaches.
Yeah, well, I love that because, inevitably, like you said, in that relationship, someone has to kind of give first, right? In that respect and on the road to that trust. But I guess like one thing that I feel like would be helpful to understand is, you mentioned KPIs, you mentioned obviously giving them a, better athlete, better tools to play with that athlete when they start doing the sport training. But what are kind of some of the intangible things that you feel like, young strength coaches probably in particular can start to do with the sport coaches to earn that trust when they maybe don't have as good of a way of collecting that research and presenting things when they're newer in their career?
I think in that that's a great question. I think number one, when you're first meeting with the strength coach, you need
Hmm.
to present what your entire offseason and in-season looks like, right? You need to
Hmm.
produce a document that says, hey, coach, these are all the things that we test. This is the reasons we test this. This is the KPIs that we're going to improve. These are the phases we go through. This is the length of these phases. These are generally the exercises we're doing, and provide enough detail. And most of the sport coaches aren't going to take a deep dive into that, but I think you initially show the coach that like I have a handle on this, I have a handle on the sport, and I have a handle on what we can develop because I think that a lot of these sport coaches have had bad experiences with the strength conditioning coaches, right? They've had
Yeah.
their best player get hurt in the weight room. They've had kids hurt backs. They've had kids not be in good enough shape. They've had a bunch of hamstring issues because, whatever was happening in the weight room or wasn't happening. So they're very hesitant if they, don't know you and don't trust you. I mean, a lot of these sport coaches bring their strength coach with them just because they know that they can trust them and they know that they fit into their system, not because they're necessarily the smartest, greatest strength coach out there. Um,
Mm.
so I think bringing a document that shows like I have a handle on this, and then I think being open to feedback. I've sat down with head coaches for the first time. And they said we don't squat, we don't barbell back squat, like we don't do that,
Yeah.
and we don't do Olympic lifting. And I think that if you're really whatever going to dig your heels in on that, that's when you're going to have problems right off the bat. I think just being open to
Yeah.
that because at the end of the day, you can still load a squat pattern a myriad of different ways. And once again, probably after a year or so, once you've proven yourself, they won't really care if you back squat because you're doing it in a safe way, you're doing it in a productive way. You can show them the benefits of that. Um, and I think too, just coming in at the mindset of like you can't fight battles you can't win, right? That's something that we worked with on our staff here. With I brought in an outside consultant, Dr. Gilham, who's really helped us understand that. Like, and I understand that now being at this associate AD level position, like Guess who's talking to the ADs every day? It's not the strength and conditioning coaches. It's the sport coaches, right?
Hmm.
Guess who has the wins and losses next to their name? It's not the strength and conditioning coaches. It's the sport
Yeah.
coaches, right? So they're going to have way more input and way more feedback. And if the sport coach isn't happy, then there's gonna at some point there will be some change, whether that's a change in the program, whether that's a change in who's working with that team, whatever that is. So you have to understand that, right? Like our job is to keep the kids safe. Our job is to develop the athletes. Our job is to do load management and all those type of things and make sure that we're not violating NCAA rules. But barring those type of scenarios, the administration is not concerned about how many days a week they're lifting or what exercises they're doing. I think it's a different mindset. Like we're concerned about that. And I think all of us that are like a director level position are concerned about that. We'll fight for our staff. But,
Mm.
at the administrative level, they're just concerned that the coach is happy and they feel like they have the support they need to be successful. So if they don't feel like they have that support, regardless of what you're doing, you're fighting a battle that you're not going to be able to win.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I guess like what are some of the hills you find coaches dying on that they just should not be that are more common than others, you think?
Yeah, well, I think another thing to your prior question and this question too is like you got to be a chameleon in this industry,
Mm.
and you got to
Hmm.
understand there's no perfect program, right? Like, you know what? Maybe high intensity machine stuff is the best for your kids for at least 3 or 4 weeks. Maybe Olympic lifting is the best. Maybe it needs to be more functional. Maybe it needs to be more ground based. All of that stuff is good. All that stuff works. What is the best for your scenario, your weight room, the time that you have allotted, the style of play that your coach wants or the system your coach wants? Um, so I think if you're a chameleon and you go into those conversations with an open mind and ready to make some changes and have a good broad knowledge about all sorts of different methodologies, then you can get there. You don't get
Hmm.
as concerned when a coach says, "Hey, we don't barbell back squat." Okay, fine. Like I got 8 pitch sharks, and we can do trap bar deadlifts, or we can do goblet squats, or whatever. Like we
Hmm.
can do those. We can still load the squat pattern a different way, or um, whatever. I think most of the time it goes around the big sticking points are probably lifting time as far as like coach wants them to lift after practice and that they've just got practice for 3 hours. They haven't eaten, they're tired and their
Yeah.
energy substrates and their nervous system is fatigued. And that's obviously not optimal to improve performance in the weight room. That's one.
Yeah.
Or conditioning tests or just the amount of time. I think sport coaches constantly live in fear of being outworked and outcoached and out strategized. So they want every
Hmm.
minute of those 20 hours a week for skill development and for practice development. And then they go, okay, coach, you got them for 2 hours a week. They can never be sore. They can never be tired. We're lifting after practice. I want to see, whatever, 40% improvement in all of their KPIs and complete body
Yeah.
composition changes in your 2 hours a week. And at the same
Yeah.
time, coach is buying them ice cream after games and Chick-fil-A post-game meals. And so there can be a myriad of different ones, but I think the lifting times and then
Yeah.
coaches really having some type of um, preconceived notion about an exercise because either they had a good player get hurt from an exercise or they didn't like to do it when they were an athlete, and so they don't want their athletes doing it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I like what you said about being a chameleon because I feel like, you could be with one organization and then you're with another and it's completely different, set of weird standards, that are being set for you in that
Yeah.
respect that, yeah, probably don't necessarily line up with what you know is the best research. But I love that because, I think a lot of coaches in any industry, collegiate, pro, private, wherever it might be, like struggle to connect with people and kind of build the programs that make the most sense for the collective, not necessarily make the most sense for, that the strength coach wants to run. And the no perfect program thing really sticks out to me there. So yeah, appreciate you sharing that, man. I guess, to broaden the topic a little bit, the goal of this episode is to dive into long-term athletic development, right? And get a good understanding of what that means to you in your own words with just that term. And then kind of, throughout the rest of the conversation, kind of get into the more nitty-gritty details of like what it actually means to execute on that in a collegiate setting. So let's start with, defining what long-term athletic development means in your own words, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that concept has changed tremendously in the last couple years with the transfer portal, with
Hmm.
NIL, with a lot of these athletes just jumping ship. I think, obviously long-term athletic development really for me means they're moving better, right? And
Hmm.
there's so many facets to that, right? There's a huge strength component. Like at the end of the day, like my teams we're gonna lift weights. And I tell recruits that and I tell parents that. Now that means we're gonna do it in a safe way. We're gonna look at their movement patterns before we train. We're gonna look at their mobility. We're gonna look at their stability and their ability to hold movement patterns before we load those so we don't make problems. And I'm also not there's a lot, like I said, there's a lot of different. I'm not married to any exercise. I'm married to patterns, and that movement also entails the strength, the multi-directional speed, the power development. All those things should be helping our kids move better. So I think that long term wise, when I first started doing this it was really a lot more standardized where you had a lot of the kids didn't actually have a high training age. They didn't really were came in pretty clean or they were multi-sport athletes. They hadn't really been in a consistent year-round training program. So you kind of had a first year program and you kind of had a second year program and a third year program regardless of the
Hmm.
sport and you had some variances to that. And then I think we got to a point where we started putting kids more into buckets, and you had your first year, let's just say pitcher program, first year off season or first year position program, and then you maybe had in those buckets, kids that needed to work on thoracic mobility or core strength or their squat pattern or whatever, and you could group kids together like that and develop all of the things that you needed for that movement over time. I think now my big mindset and our mindset here as a group is now we got to maximize our roster right now to win. We might have this roster together for 6 months, 8 months, whatever it is. We're going to have 18-year-old kids that have not lifted consistently that need to develop in the weight room. And you're going to have older kids that are sixth year, seventh year, whatever, eighth year now that have already had three college strength coaches that have been through the battles, who have a very high training age, that may have some type of, I don't know, soft tissue or joint issue that they have to just be healthy. And that might be a more of a mobility focus or more of a stability focus or whatever that is, and maintain their strength. So I think now that long-term development, and the cool thing now is we all have so many more tools to look at to help with that long-term development. You're going to
Hmm.
have all sorts of different mobility assessments in three-dimensional cameras that tell you what their ankles and knees and whatever thoracic spine looks like. You're going to have the force plate numbers that tell you if you need to work more on strength or more on power. We have a lot more assessments than just the old traditional one rep max and whatever, 60-yard sprint tests. You can do all of the different sprints and 5 yards and flyings and figure out what each athlete needs. So we have
Hmm.
a lot more tools. I think the hard part then is putting that all together with 40 kids at the same time for an hour, 3 times a week, by yourself. How are you implementing
Yeah.
that and how are you meeting the individual needs, but also still, and I think this is real key. At the end of the day, the sport coaches still want to see kids coming in and working hard, right? And
Hmm.
and you're developing the culture as a strength coach. And you can't get away from that. You can't get too much into all we're doing is rolling out and recovery, or too much whatever, Swiss ball or functional, as much as all that stuff we do it here, and I think it has a place. Like that
Hmm.
hard work component, that team bonding component, that component of you're pushing them to do things that they don't think they can do or that they're not going to do on their own, and you're holding them accountable to that. We can't lose sight of that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, It sounds like there's kind of a, new standard, obviously. Like you mentioned, you kind of have like maybe 6 to 8 months with a kid now, on a more frequent basis than you used to. And, but you also have all the ability to dive in and get to the core of what they need faster with those assessment tools. Then there's that kind of third piece that we're talking about with the culture element and things that are kind of going into that. So, I don't know where on the map you think it makes sense to go deeper on, first, but I'd be curious kind of like as you see, things unfolding a few years after this transfer portal stuff, like where's that going and what do you feel like you need to focus on more as a coach to deepen the experience with these athletes?
Well, what I think something that we started implementing here, and that has been helpful for us, and this was, I'm a little bit old school, so this was a new thing for me as well. Was like, okay, you do your initial assessments, right? You've
Hmm.
identified your sport specific needs, you've identified your sport specific energy system training. You do those assessments and then get an idea where the program needs to go for each kid, but just sitting down with the athletes and talking to them, um, and getting to know their goals. So like we generally set up a sign up sheet and we will go through and spend, only 10, 15 minutes with each athlete and just seeing where their mindset is at, because that's been, I think, helpful for me where I'm bringing in a
Mm.
kid and I'm a little bit old school. Like I want to lift weights. I want to increase your overall strength because I know it increases all these other, your ability, the floor and the ceiling for all these other training qualities. But you might have a kid who doesn't isn't on that same page or has a different idea of what they're doing. And sometimes, most of us do a great job in we're going to meet what that kid wants, but explain to them how we're going to get there together and explain to them like, you say you want to get faster, but we look at the force plate and you're not producing much force, and there's a strength component to that. There's also a power a plyometric component to that, you know.
Hmm.
And we're going to get to that speed component, maybe running technique, and this is what it's going to look like, and kind of explaining that to them. I think that the kids
Hmm.
now they've had different strength coaches. They've had different coaches or strength coaches in high school that they really respect and like and buy in, who maybe telling them something different than what you're doing, or but we're all probably trying to get to the same place in just a
Yeah.
different way. So, or in a way that we know and believe in. So just having those conversations with kids, making sure that we're on the same page. And then I think they have buy-in too, where they go like, okay, coach is giving me some autonomy, some feedback into what we're doing. They understand what I want. Um, they're not just bringing us in and like it's not the old school stuff that we used to do, right? Like you're just doing it. If you don't want to do it, just get out of the room. You just leave
Hmm.
because we're moving forward. Well, now that kid's going to transfer or going to be miserable or be telling the coach, you know, Coach Jim is an a-hole or whatever. I don't want to deal with him. And, so I think that having those conversations with the kids, letting them know that like what we're doing will address their goals and,
Yeah.
having some communication with them as opposed to just a straight authoritarian military style.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing.
Yeah, well, I would push against you calling yourself old school in that way. I mean, the fact that you're giving kids self-autonomy, the fact that you're willing to have those conversations, I think speaks volumes to just like something that not every college weight room, I'm sure, has. Certainly not every weight room I've been in as an athlete. And I guess I'm curious, like, that all sounds like it would be very subjective from the athlete's point of view, right? Like you kind of collect a lot of this objective data on like, hey, this is where we probably need to, do more of the work with you. But then their subjective feedback kind of comes like, how often do you see like a massive disagreement between those two things, and how do you address it when there is?
Yeah, I mean, that happens all the time, right? Where
Yeah.
the kid says, "Oh, I'm not into lifting heavy weights. I'm not going to lift heavy weights and all these things." And then you show them the
Yeah.
data, like, well, you're producing the least amount of force on the team. So,
Yeah, it might be a problem.
you need to be moving some weight. You need to be wrestling with some weight. So I think that that's where then you go back and say, like, you kind of go to and say, all right, well, this kid maybe isn't even here for an off season. however it worked out, they're just here basically. If they're a fall sport, they're just going to be here for 5 or 6 months, and you're not even going to have a true off season with them. So my mindset might be different with that athlete and how we're
Hmm.
going to get there. I think that you have
Yeah.
your non-negotiables, right? Like at the end of the day, everybody's going to be here on time. Everybody's going to work hard. Everybody's going to buy into certain parts of whatever your culture is, those standards, but that might not mean that everybody's doing the same thing. And you got to be to the point where you're comfortable with a kid that like maybe isn't doing exactly what you want, but they're not killing your culture. They're still performing at a high level. Coach is happy with where they're at. And you kind of realize at the end of the day, like if this kid is helping us win games, it really doesn't matter that I didn't increase his squat max, whatever,
Yeah.
50 pounds. If that kid's healthy and moving better, going back to that movement component, maybe they're doing a
Yeah.
really elite job with their whatever, their mobility and their plyo stuff. And I'm helping them get there, and they're coming in on their own to do some extra stuff in these
Hmm.
areas. And they're still part of the culture when we do things that are really hard, like we do team competitions or something where we just see
Hmm.
who wants to gut something out, they're participating, then okay, I'm gonna work with that person on some of these other things.
Beautiful. I love that. And one culture piece I want to ask is like you have those gutted out things that you do. I'm curious, how often is the kid that's the best at their sport the kid that's also putting out the hardest on that sort of exercise? And do you see like a massive correlation there?
No, that's a great question. We've talked about this for years, right? I mean, very rarely is your weight room All-American your best player, right? I
Hmm.
mean, very
Yep.
rarely. You have some really strong kids that come in the weight room, they just look amazing, and then they're just not, for whatever reason, they might be playing for you, but they're not the highest level of kids. I mean, I see that all the time. Um, and I think with the gutted out things, what you see more is the kid that what I love about that is you bring in some kid who maybe is a little bit overlooked by his teammates because they don't look a certain way, and then you put
Yeah.
whatever 300 pounds on a sled and have him push it 80 yards, and all of a sudden this athlete that is a little bit overlooked and maybe doesn't look the part in the weight room, like is
Hmm.
really mentally tough, grinds that out and
Yeah.
finishes top 10 on the team or whatever. And I think that
Hmm.
you see character. I mean, I think that's another thing that we see in the weight room is we have a lot of athletes that are super high level in their sport. Obviously, they're super skill developed, but we find out real quick who's comfortable being uncomfortable. They're in the weight room. They're
Hmm.
not super comfortable. They haven't done a lot of these things. They don't like doing these things. They don't like grinding it out. And that's part of bringing that group together and helping them go through those things in a way that develops the team and develops the culture. And that's why I love those gutted out things because you see really when things get tough, who's comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, no, I love that. And it does bring up the culture of everyone else on the team when they see that. I mean, there's no doubt when you got a bunch of men and women screaming, for the
Yeah.
guy that's maybe not getting all the playing time that's kicking ass today,
Yeah.
it strengthens the bond. So cool, I love that. Now, I guess like I want to kind of start to talk a little bit more about the weight room X's and O's here, and kind of what things look like. It sounds like there's you know, two kinds of athletes. There's the ones that you're going to have that go into the portal, right? And you have these 6 to 8 month windows. But nevertheless, I'm sure there's still folks that are with you for 4 years that are kind of there grinding it out. Is it a different approach when you know you've kind of got someone who's going to be with you long term versus short term? And like, what are the kind of considerations that we're making in those scenarios there?
Yeah, I think that, well, you definitely with your young kids have to have that mindset, right? Regardless of what happens, like that you're going
Hmm.
to have that mindset of like long-term development and what does this athlete need? I think you also have to have the mindset of even the ones that are here for 4 years, right? Generally there's a lot of things that happen that you just got to be ready to pivot on. Maybe they change positions. I've had a lot of guys that come in as two-way guys and I'm training them as a position guy, and then year two they're really only a pitcher or vice versa, right?
Hmm.
Or and regardless of the sport, you might have some people that change positions. You might have some people that come in long term and they're not going to play at all for a year. So you have a whole year of
Yeah.
off season, which is awesome. And then you have other ones that are going to play a lot right away. And then maybe they
Yeah.
don't play as much the next year. So, it's really a year to year. It's just looking at it, okay, if this is 4 years, this is what I want to accomplish, but then it's being able to pivot and make those adjustments year to year. I think,
Hmm.
ultimately, you're looking at, okay, right off the bat, is there some type of injury that they never had completely rehabbed? The amount of kids that come here that have had really poor rehab and are still really unstable and weak in a joint, you got to address that first. Is there some type of body composition issue? That's going to determine a lot of what you're doing, right? Do they need to
Yeah.
lose some fat-free mass or some fat mass? Do they need to gain some fat-free mass? You need to address those. Some coaches, sport coaches have told me like, Jim, I don't care about all the numbers. You keep that to yourself. Like when we take the court, I want to be the biggest, strongest team. I want my guys to look the strongest. Okay. We
Hmm.
might spend some more time doing hypertrophy work and those type of things, right?
Yeah.
So, and then you got to just look at, like I said, these movement patterns. Like, is their squat pattern good? Is their lunge pattern good? Is their,
Yeah.
how is their thoracic pattern? And really, I think most of us are addressing all of those issues kind of simultaneously, right? That's part of it, right? And we all know that if they just come in and do compound movements and they do some good mobility work and they do some energy system training, you're going to accomplish hitting a lot of those goals, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I think that, exercise progressions is another huge component of this. And that's where I really credit, Charles Poliquin, the late Charles Poliquin, and I
Hmm.
was able to do a lot of his certifications early in my career and learn from Preston Green, who's now the head basketball guy at Duke. And
Yeah.
the exercise progression was really a huge eye opener for me because I think that when you're a young strength coach, you just take your whatever exam right off the bat, and you just think, you see these compound movements and you know how to do those, but what about all the auxiliary stuff? What about all the single leg movement? How do you
Mm-hmm.
progress somebody through that? What does that look like? How much time do they need in each one of these progressions? How much time do you have? How much time is your off season? So I think really also getting into more unilateral work, more dumbbell work. Yes, we still barbell squat, we deadlift, all those things, but I spend the majority of my time doing unilateral work, unilateral work, dumbbell work, unstable work, those type of
Mm-hmm.
things to build athletic qualities. Because at the end of the day, most of our athletes aren't sitting there in a wide stance, powerlifting squat type of
Yeah.
pattern in performing, right? They're really most of our sports are transverse plane and frontal plane. So making sure that we're adding that stuff as auxiliary movements to complement those movement patterns, So I think having an understanding of how to bring somebody through those progressions.
Mm. Yeah, I love what you're talking about, the exercises there, and I'd like to, kind of go maybe a little deeper on that. I have specific questions about like maybe absolute strength in this context, right? Like you mentioned a few times, adding 50 pounds to this person's squat, like whatever, you know what I mean? It kind of doesn't matter. So what are like the specific KPIs you're lasering in on? Is it, you kind of build this web for them specific to them and their sport? Or are you like, no, these are the lifts that transfer the most? Like where are you thinking about needing to see the most progression to leverage that transfer to sport?
That's a good question. I think that, right now, for a lot of our teams, going back to your absolute versus relative strength, right?
Hmm.
Especially on the Olympic side, most of our sports are relative strength athletes, right? Like they need to be able to move their body weight, and
Hmm.
even every pound of muscle that they gain is awesome, and we feel proud about that. But that's, whatever, 10 more pounds of force they have to produce off the ground to move that pound of muscle.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
we tend to stay a lot in our relative strength parameters.
Yep.
Um, so I think keeping that in mind, keeping your time under tension, your tempos in mind when you're
Hmm.
adding those parameters. And I think that really, so one thing I've realized a lot in baseball world for the last couple of years, you kind of mentioned, it was, baseball, the pro scouts used to ask me a lot about, squat maxes or maybe different weight room
Hmm.
metrics. Now it's all about the force plates. That's all they care about, right? They
Yeah,
don't
sure.
get super concerned about, they might ask me if the athlete's a good lifter or what their attitude is in the weight room and those type of things, but they really want to know the force plate numbers because that's the one thing that's standard across the board. And
Mm.
squat maxes
Hmm.
look different where depending on where you're going and depending on where the kid is and what
Yeah.
all these issues that kids have. If you're belted up wide stance with a low bar, that's a much different squat max than
Yeah.
a bilateral stance, whatever front squat, and I
Yeah.
think both those can be effective. So I think that what we want to see is improvement in those areas. I
Hmm.
think the other thing that we look at is or I look at a lot. This is once again Paulquin stuff is structural balance. Like making sure that your ratios between your pressing and your pulling and your rotator cuff
Hmm.
are balanced. And I do think at the end of the day, if I had to choose like one exercise to look at, across the board. Man, I would probably say maybe a trap bar deadlift. I just think that
Hmm.
your squat patterns, there's so many limiting factors depending on your torso and your low back strength. I mean, most kids are not excited about putting 400 pounds on their back, and
No.
they're very worried about their back and
Hmm.
we see it all the time. Like once they go to test, their range of motion changes, all of these things. But I still do strength maxes. Maybe it's a 3 rep max, maybe it's a 1 rep max because I think that's important to have kids challenge themselves, to have kids be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Psychological component to it though,
There's a
right? Is overcoming
psychological
shit you don't
component,
want to
and
do.
then
Yeah.
yeah, I think that I think identify a press, a squat, a pull from the ground, y- where they're at, and those numbers need to improve because that's also what you're basing your loading parameters for the rest of your
Hmm.
exercises off as well.
Yeah.
I mean, so
And how in the weeds do you guys get on like accessory movements? You know what I mean? The stuff that builds the stuff. How do you sort of think about that on maybe just a global scale of your program?
well, I think it's important. I mean, there's no question it's important. I think I think
Sure.
it's a give and take, right? I'm a big
Hmm.
believer in the Dan John rule, right? Like
Hmm.
80% of what you're doing is coming from your first three movements, or your
Yep.
80% of what you're accomplishing in a workout is coming from your first three movements. But those
Totally agree.
I mean, just having a little bit of powerlifting experience myself, or you look at Olympic lifters, like the accessory stuff is as important in making sure you're programming that the right way as well. But I
Hmm.
also think that we can get too in the weeds with that, especially with the young training
Yeah.
age individuals. Like, do you really need to be doing wave loading on reverse curls and these different things? Like,
Yeah.
I think that the exercise selection is very important, but I think the loading, the sets and reps, I think you can keep the volume fairly high and just keep it 3 sets of 10 for the most part.
Yeah.
I also think playing with the tempo is very important, where
Yeah.
depending on what you're trying to do with the joint or the strength movement, playing with the different tempos or having an idea why you're using a different tempo to either focus more on starting strength or whatever that is. Those are
Hmm.
important parameters you need to be considering when you're doing your programming.
Yeah, and I mean, because work with a lot of high school athletes on my end, and you see like a massive, just eccentric loading deficit compared to what they can do at a normal speed and like what they can
Yes.
actually control. There might be a
Yes.
massive gap there, just like there
Yes.
is with like explosive strength deficit. They might be able to lift all the weight in the world, but then they are slow as hell, when it comes to
Yes.
actual field stuff. So here's a question I have for you. Obviously, like there's a component here of preparing certain individuals to go play at a professional level, right? And that's not everyone's goal, but that's probably like a pretty core group that exists between all the sports, right? So I'm curious, like year four, maybe it's year 8, who fucking knows, right? But they're at that stage, of transitioning to be a pro player, what do you see are the qualities that those kids that go on to play at that pro level have? And to clarify kind of what I'm asking here, have they nailed that explosive strength deficit? Have they nailed that eccentric loading deficit? Like, or are there other things that I'm not speaking on that they just have that the folks that don't get to go to that level, don't have at that stage?
It's a good question. I think from a well, obviously right off the bat, like they just have different genes, right? Like I mean,
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I've
yeah.
seen some freshmen come in that like have never lifted, that squat 400 pounds and bench 315. Like you never even lifted before. Like that was one of my biggest wake up calls coming here, 26 years ago. I thought I was a good lifter and a badass
Yeah,
athlete. And I realized like, oh yeah, this is why I'm an intern and this dude is
yeah.
starting at running back because
Dude, same. Yeah,
genetically they are superior in every way
yeah,
than what I am. So I think you're going to see some of those metrics on the force plate, like right off the bat. Like
yep.
this kid is different.
Human
Um,
tendon. Yeah.
I think that like one of the things I've noticed too is like, especially ones that make it right away, like it's a different mentality every day. Like the ones that come here. I mean, I'm going to use Austin Wells as an example, the starting catcher
Sure.
for the Yankees.
Yeah.
Remember when we brought him in, coach told me like this guy's going to be in the big leagues in 4 years or something. And I was just like, okay, whatever. Like you kind of hear that a lot. But
But then
I
he
mean,
was.
from
Yeah.
from day one, that dude's mentality in the weight room was elite. Like,
Yeah.
and I think the other thing that is really missed that a lot of these pro mentality type of athletes have is they're also elite with all the little things around their body, the recovery, the rolling out, the
Hmm.
stretching, the whatever, the BFR shorts, the cold tubs, whatever
Yeah.
recovery modalities, and they're constantly taking care of their bodies at a high level.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
that's what I've kind of noticed. I think,
Mm.
um, you know, baseball's a little bit different too because it's such a skill, such a hand-eye coordination. Like
Huge.
I've had some really bad body dudes that have had long-term careers, but they also had a different mentality too. And I think the other thing is, and this is so cliche, but they really do enjoy the process. They enjoy
Hmm.
getting to the field early. They enjoy coming to the weight room early. They enjoy coming in the weight room and doing extra stuff.
Yeah.
They enjoy that process so much more. And you can just, I mean, we've all seen so many really talented, the genetically talented kids that don't want to lift, don't want to do recovery,
Yep.
don't want to go to class, whatever it is, and they end up ultimately not having very long careers, even in college level. And you're like, man,
Yeah.
you have all the
100%.
tools, but your mentality is not right. So I think that
Yeah.
and that's where like if I see some athletes like that, and I'll use examples like Austin Wells or others, like this is what it looks like, and this is what the mentality you need to have, and try to work with them on that. And I found that to be helpful. Um, but I think one of the things we can consider in is that, and this is something I've dabbled in the last couple of years too, is like, and I've seen because I know for a fact that whatever 26 years ago I had my we lifted a lot heavier, and but I don't know if I helped going back to that movement. I don't know if I helped kids move
Hmm.
better, right? Like I know I had
Hmm.
a lot
Yeah.
more whatever 500-pound squatters in the baseball team, but guess
Sure.
what? I also had a lot more knee injuries. I also had a lot more back injuries, and I don't know if
Hmm.
that was helping them move better. To that example we talked about with the kid that can move a ton of weight, but they're very slow, right?
Yeah.
So I think that you have to be cognizant and aware of what makes them great, and not
Yeah.
doing stuff in the weight room that's gonna be a detriment to that, right? Like,
Hmm.
hey, I love doing chin ups and lat pull downs and pull ups as much as anybody, but
Yeah.
you have to realize there's a cost of that too. Like as their lats get tighter and tighter, they start to have less hip mobility, start to have more whatever cervical issues. They lose thoracic mobility. If you're doing something that's making the muscles bigger, but they're losing mobility component in their rotational sport, you got to be aware of
Hmm.
that. It's like that's not
Yeah.
helping them. Now they have
Yeah.
arm problems. So like, yeah, I'm really proud you can do 30 pull-ups, but now your shoulder hurts all the time. So I got to put my ego aside
Yeah.
and say, like, what makes this kid really good or really explode at their skill or their sport? How am I complementing that and still getting the things done that I want to get done as a strength coach?
That's such a cool way to think about it, because there's so many emergent qualities that create an elite athletic performance. You know what I mean? Strength is one of them, right? Amongst, dozens probably that add up to actually what we see on the field. And so, you know, I'm curious, like, from a periodization standpoint, do you like to kind of focus really deep on like a block model where you go deep on like maybe at one, two, three of those like specifically at a time, or do you kind of view things more on a concurrent model where you're raising multiple qualities at once, or at least maintaining multiple qualities at once? Like, how do you kind of think about that periodization element? Because we had a lot of coaches write in before the episode asking about periodization models in particular. So I want to make sure we address that.
Yeah, no, and that's where we can go down
Yeah.
rabbit holes for days, right? I
Yeah.
think
Yep.
so. My basic thing is I'm going to lay out my off season, whatever it is. Let's just say going back to baseball, it's a 16-week fall off season, right? I'm going to break that
Hmm.
down, and we're going to do generally an undulating type of model. We're going to do 3 weeks of
Yep.
anatomical adaptation, 3 weeks of hypertrophy, 3 weeks of strength, but with still
Yep.
higher volume. Then go back, hit another hypertrophy phase, and come back and hit more of a strength, and then get into our power stuff at the end, right?
Yeah.
I have that laid out. But then I also kind of review that at the end of that each phase and say, okay, are we getting there or are we not? What do I need to spend more time doing this? Do I need to spend more time, or are we ready to move on? Maybe I have an older group. I think that's another
Hmm.
consideration, right? If I have a really younger team, we might have to spend more time in those early phases. If I have a really older team, with
Hmm.
guys that have been with me, then we're going to move through phases quicker. Um,
Yeah.
I would say that, yeah, we're trying to improve. That's the balancing act, right? I think we're all trying to improve multiple characteristics, performance characteristics simultaneously, right? How you
Hmm.
do that, man,
Yeah.
I mean, you can get into all the different ways of how to do that. So uh, I wouldn't say we do block. I think we're
Hmm.
trying to improve all those because I just don't have much time. That's the other thing either.
Yeah.
That's the other thing
Yeah.
too. It's not like I have 4 years to get somebody for the Olympics. I have to maximize my roster right now. So
Hmm.
I would say that every week we're continuing to work on and improve those different characteristics, whether that's, whatever, altitude jumps for eccentric loading, different
Yeah.
ISOs, plyometrics, different strength training parameters. And, it's a lot of it is give and take. And a lot of that is like going back and making adjustments and to your program in that next phase or even in the next year, and then seeing
Yeah.
what works. And the other, I think, really challenging part at this level too is you put together what you want to do and it's going to be sweet. You have it all laid out. And then the
Yeah.
kids come in, let's even on Monday morning for a training session. And guess what? They just got destroyed all weekend by the sport
Yeah.
coach,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
think
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the factor that you really have. That's where the art of this thing comes in. So, okay, you had 8 hours of practice on Saturday, and then you whatever played a 10 inning game on Sunday, and then
Yep.
coach was pissed. So whatever happened, or you did extra running, and
Yeah.
then the kids have midterms or whatever, so they were up all night. So then they come in to lift, and you go like, well, I had this really advanced, neurologically demanding session planned, and we're going to work on all these different strength qualities. But how do I modify this now, knowing that they're not going to probably be able to hit the intensities that I want? They might not be able to hit the volume that I want. They're still here. We have to do something, right? So maybe I'm cutting back the volume. Maybe I'm cutting back some of the auxiliary stuff, and we're going to spend more time on the
Mm.
front end prepping and doing mobility, and more time on the back end doing recovery stuff
Mm.
to hopefully
Hmm.
set them up for the next day or 2 days later to
Yeah.
come back and train some of these qualities that we're trying to train. I think that that's where that's another component at the college level where these athletes have practice literally year round now. They have
Yeah.
sport practice year round. And
Yep.
so it's not like you truly have a time where they're not practicing and they're not doing skill development. And you got to be cognizant of, okay, yeah, I have this really great program to increase whatever training quality, but that kid has to leave the weight room and go field ground balls for 3 hours after this.
Yeah.
Like, what does that do to
Yeah.
their back? What does that
Just
do
gasoline
to
on a
their
fire
glute?
at that point, huh? Like,
Yeah. So that's where like I kind of get into really more of like less is more. Get some really good quality stuff, get some intense stuff. And
hmm
then depending on the day, like, hey, there's also some days that, hey, they're going to come in and they did something stupid as a team or whatever, and they're
Yeah.
all sleep deprived and dehydrated. We're going to have to push through that. It's week 3 of the off season. We're going to have to push through that. But if we're in season, now it's going to be a different mindset of what can I get out of them that day and still help them so that we can win a game later on this week.
Yeah, and I guess like, you know, there's being I view kind of programming as three or four categories. You're right and you're getting to what you want to get to really fast. You're right, but you're getting there slow. You're wrong, but it's kind of slow to see if you're wrong, and then you're just like fucking going like downhill fast with these things, right? And so obviously the goal of every program is to get the maximum quality with speed, right? Like the fastest
Yes.
that we can obtain it. So I'm curious, like, you mentioned like picking a few core things to do that day, right? And you filter that through obviously how they're coming in and how they're feeling. And I'm wondering if there's just some like kind of it's exercises or it's a concept that gives you the confidence to make that decision because that's where I think a lot of coaches at every level
Yeah.
like start to second guess themselves like but what gives you the confidence that you're making the right decision when you have that and you're like we had 10 things we were going to do today like these are the two and I'm picking right, you know what I mean? What gives you that
Yeah.
confidence?
Yeah. Well, I think I first of all just focus on what was my plan for my major compound movement that day, right? So
hmm
let's just go off a squat, right? If you let's just say you're only squatting once a week with high intensity.
hmm
If they come in that day and you go like, "Ah, man, maybe we should move the squat day," but then you start to say, well, now it's going to be whatever, 10 days between squat sessions, right? That's going to have a
hmm
serious detrimental effect of what I'm doing. So I'm going to stick with this pattern, right? And this is another Charles Poliquin thing, right? Never
yep,
sacrifice intensity. So you can sacrifice the
totally,
volume, but never
yes.
sacrifice the intensity. And then I'm going to watch as much as I can the individuals doing that movement and just look at the bar speed. Look at the bar speed of that day, right? I got whatever, 30, 40 kids in here at the same time. And I'm watching their warm-up sets and I'm kind of in my brain going, okay, like these 25 kids, like let's go. I'm going to cut the volume from, I don't know, whatever, 5 to 3. I'm going to cut the
hmm
sets from 5 to 3. We're just going to hit 3 sets of 3, but you're going to put some weight on your back and you're going to feel
yeah,
that.
we're gonna
I need
hit,
you to push
yeah,
through that. And then these other 15 kids, I can just tell that like it's not there. This is going to be a garbage set. They're not going to be able to hit the intensity. They're going to further deplete their energy substrate. They're going to
totally.
further deplete their nervous system. So maybe we're going to go over and pitch shark instead,
Yeah,
and
just
I'm going to have
totally
to shut
take,
it. Yeah.
yeah, the
Or go
axial load
trap
off
bar
it.
deadlift or something instead. I'm going to
hmm
make that adjustment. So I think my mindset is, getting the compound movement that I need done. This is off-season mindset. Getting the compound movement that I need done that day, paying attention to the speed of the bar and what that looks like and what are they real in their technique? Are they really like bent forward? Do I see a back strain coming? Do I see a
hmm
knee issue coming? Like, is there mobility just out the door? Like, I can tell right away, like, you're really tight today for some reason. Like, let's change it up, whether that's
Yeah.
elevating their heels or whatever. Not maybe, like I said, pitch sharking. Because at the end of the day, if
hmm
that kid gets hurt and now I can't train them, whatever, for 3 weeks because they have some type of injury, then now I'm even further in the hole, right? So,
Yeah.
um, so I think, looking at bar speed, looking at that, and keeping in mind that compound movement that I needed done that day, and then keeping in mind, uh, oh, like what's optimal for that athlete and where we're at, you know. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's there's not one thing. I think obviously the force plates, you know, like you brought up a good point where sometimes we kind of had those four categories, like you're getting there fast, you're getting there, or you're going the wrong way. I think that's where we're looking
Hmm.
at. We do weekly force plate assessments, right? And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
using that as a metric to make sure that like, hey, I know there's going to be some fluctuation week to week, but there's not long term drops, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's another great thing that you can make these modifications on bridge. You know, you can make
Yeah.
the exercise, you can change the exercise or the loading parameters on bridge. So you're tracking it, right? So you can go back the next year and be like, at the same time, I noticed at the same time last year we had these issues. I had to make these adjustments. It's all there for you on bridge as opposed to you digging through some Excel file or something. You can see the
Yeah.
modifications you had to make. You can track that. And you also can track the volume that you've been
Hmm.
doing and the intensities that you've been doing because you have it all laid out there for you on Bridge, right? So,
Yeah.
um, that's where my initial feedback would be on that question.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, the data is such an important piece of this puzzle, right? Because like you said, like you need to know if there's a long-term drop and you need to like quickly address that, I'm sure. So but talk about like kind of more of like the presence tech has in your guys' weight room and how you kind of like how are you leveraging that, right, to get the most out of it? Because it's such a I kind of when I'm talking to folks about Bridge and just about technology in general, one, it's supposed to be like hiring an employee. This is supposed to like streamline things, leverage efficiency, and so on and so forth. But also, like, it's a medium for our art. And, Christopher Nolan isn't going and shooting Oppenheimer on his, like, fucking iPhone 11, right? He's going and using, like, IMAX cameras, and, like, it's a specific choice for that medium of film, right? So, like, talk me through kind of how the art and science is, like, merging with tech, because I think that's a really interesting place we're at as a society, but specifically as strength coaches as well.
Yeah, and there's so much tech out there, right? And I think for so much of us, it's hard to like utilize it in real time efficiently,
Hmm.
especially if you
Hmm.
don't have a sports science person with you.
Yeah. I bet.
It's really hard. I think that, for us, the tech goes back to, the force plate stuff, looking at not only their counter movement jumps, but their mid thigh pulls on a ideally biweekly basis. And then going back to the bar speed, once again, I've been around enough where I can kind of tell, but I think there's so many
Hmm.
good VBT systems out there where
Hmm.
you can use that VBT system and you program whatever, I want these parameters because we're training for strength or for power or whatever. And if they're not hitting the parameters you want on the bar, you can adjust the load till they are. So I think those VBT systems are another huge component
Hmm.
into that fatigue and getting done what you want to get done at the end of the day. And then honestly too, like I think that's where some of these wearables and stuff are crucial for those of us that have it. There was a whole nother myriad of issues with those as far as
Yeah.
tracking and who has the data and the coaches, but you can monitor, or any type of load management stuff that you have, whatever it is, like you can see these athletes load, you can see their acute to chronic ratios, and you're going to see that play out in the weight room as well. So ideally, you're looking at that stuff before they even come in, and you have an idea where they're at physiologically. And I think the wellness surveys are good as well.
Hmm.
I know a lot of people use those, so that can help
Yeah.
paint a picture. And I also think, this is the old school. Like sometimes, man, these are 18, 19, 20-year-old kids. Like just get in and let's go. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
these are 19, 20-year-old Ferraris. These are high level athletes.
Yeah.
They can, sometimes I feel myself going like, man, we need to just push. Like you're going to be okay. We're going to push through this.
Yes.
You'll recover. You'll adapt. Um, you know, uh,
Yeah, you
but
can't be too sensitive to that stuff because it can ruin a plan just as quickly as it can make one awesome, right?
no question. No question.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, I want to transition us kind of into more of a audience Q&A. So there's a
Okay.
few questions that have been submitted, and if you guys have further questions, please submit them in the chat now so that we can get to them. One of the ones that came in was, how has Gary Gray influenced your training perspective?
Sure. So I was very fortunate enough to become a fellow of applied functional science through the Gray Institute
Cool.
years ago, and I really, in my journey, I realized whatever, maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, Rob Harris, who's been a mentor to me, and some others, like I realized that like we talked about, movement is key, right?
Hmm.
And I was missing the boat. I knew how to get people stronger. I knew how to get people faster, but I really didn't know what functional movement meant and how to load that. Like I knew you could just make up something. I can do a step up with a med ball into a whatever, touch a basketball rim or these different movements, but what are really the progressions for that? And how do I look at movement? And I think, the Gray Institute and Gary Gray, um, man, it'll just blow your mind as far as like really breaking down movement at every joint, how everything works together. There's a lot of stuff that in there that people may or may not buy into, but I think it's a lot. It changed my mentality as far as like this is an agonist, this is an antagonist. This is what this muscle does at a joint. To this is how these muscles work together to create movement with ground reaction force, with gravity, and really a lot of the muscles don't do in during function what you read or what you've learned them to do in the textbook, right? From a cadaver
Hmm.
at a joint. Like that's when the body starts moving, when the foot hits the ground, as Gary would say, like that changes everything. So how do I really produce movement and also making me think about the transverse plane a lot more, right? And how
Hmm.
important that is to all movements and how things are happening in the transverse plane. Um, in every movement, even gait, there's a huge transverse plane component to that that I didn't consider before I took that
Hmm.
course. So it's a crazy amount of information. It'll blow your mind. And
Yeah.
I think you also have to decipher, okay, how much, like anything, man, there's so many good, great seminars. There's so many guys that are out there that are so smart, way smarter than me. But how do then I apply some of this to the college setting where I have 40 athletes at the same time with all these different training ages and a sport coach over there watching me and just wanting to see
Hmm.
kids get buried every day? So.
Yeah. I love that. I have one follow-up kind of to that in regards to that transverse plane stuff. Like, is there kind of a concept here that you feel like you're understanding as it relates to training in that plane that maybe people don't understand?
Well, like I said, I mean, just even I think that the big concept is think about most of what we do traditional training is in the sagittal plane, right? All of your
Hmm.
squats and lunges and all the things we do is in the transverse plane, right?
Hmm.
But if you look at, sport, especially, with the exception of, even sprinting still has a lot of transfers. But like if you think of
Tons.
most reactive sports, basketball, soccer, football, right? Like they got to be
Yep.
able to plant on one leg, rotate their hips, rotate their thoracic spine, move their
Yep.
hips, get to another place, backpedal, move, and so like we should be training that plane as well. So like one
Hmm.
of the things they
Hmm.
talk about at the Gray Institute is like you should be able to it's better for your athlete to be able to squat, have a good strong squat pattern in all three planes as opposed to just being able to be really heavy bilateral, like I said, wide stance,
Mm.
power, lifting, squat.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like that. Tell me what you mean by that. I'm assuming like, obviously, okay, one of them is going to be that like let's just call it back squat or, bilateral version. But
Yeah.
what are like the other variations that you're like, no, we need to like increase the deficit here?
Yeah, so I think the easy one is just to think about frontal plane, right? So we're going to
Yep.
go with we're going to do some narrow stance squats and we're going to do some wide
Hmm.
stance squats to increase that
Yeah.
that frontal plane movement, right?
Love it.
And
Yes.
thinking
Yeah.
about the transverse plane, we might bring our toes in for some squats and we might externally rotate our feet and bring toes out for some
Hmm.
squats, right?
Hmm.
So, and then you could get, you go down these rabbit holes where now I'm going to have my front foot in front, my front
Yep.
foot's internally rotated, my back foot is externally
Yeah.
rotated. I'm in a wide stance and I'm loading that pattern, right? I
Yeah, it
think
sounds
that,
like you're playing a lot with the foot and hip, therefore knee and hip position based around that and like where those two things are at relation to each other. Is that correct or?
yeah, for a squat pattern, yes. For a
Hmm.
squat pattern, the transverse plane, yes. And then
Love
I
that.
think the other thing from the Gray Institute is just the connectivity, right? Like how
Hmm.
dysfunction in your shoulder or lack of mobility or whatever in your shoulder is going to affect how your feet move and putting that all together. And yeah, so I think at the end of the day, all that stuff is awesome and there's a place for it. My one caveat would be like you got to be careful with the loading of those type of things. 'Cause that's where people get hurt when you get into some of these really weird positions.
Yeah, funky position and
The loading
yeah,
is going
throw
to
a
be
barbell on your back. Yeah.
much less. Like, yeah, there's
Yeah.
certain people that can do it, but like in general, just get people in these positions first and then
Yeah.
gradually load it. It doesn't have to be super heavy. And that's
Well, because
where,
it's so novel, right? I mean, it's like, all that stimulus early on for a new variation is predominantly neurological. And once you have that beefed up, right? Like
yeah,
you're probably you've gotten what you need out of it. And that, like you said, adding 50 pounds is like not maybe the greatest thing we can do.
yeah,
Love
no
that.
question.
Cool, man. Next question, all right. In regards to power output slash vertical jump, what KPI slash metrics on the force plate have you seen to be best to focus on with the hundreds of metrics available?
Yeah. That is a great question, man. And I'll just be real honest. Like, we're continuing to go down that rabbit hole, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would just say that from my end, on a performance standpoint, I'm just going to kind of focus on peak power per body mass as far as
Okay.
looking at are my athletes maintaining force throughout the course of a off season or in season, in season especially, right? Like, because I'm not
Yeah.
going to do as much plyos in season, so I want to still make sure they're maintaining that peak power. Um, and then from like an asymmetry standpoint, we're going to look at both legs, eccentric braking, making sure that they're keeping they're not getting out of that 15% asymmetry, like they're keeping within 15%. And then, I have some really good, smart people on staff here, Nick
Mhm.
McEntee and Ben Crawford, that take a deeper dive into some of these other metrics and help me understand some of, they're really starting to look now at the force wave and some different things. So that's been helpful
Cool.
to look at. I think one of the biggest things we've learned here the last 2 years too on the force plate is just um, the quality of the test. Like really making sure that the athletes are going down fast they can, getting up, making sure the effort is there. Because what we really
Yeah.
realized early on with the force plates was that our testing quality wasn't very good. And we really started to hammer making sure that you're getting a good effort and a good test because otherwise the data is not useful for you anyways.
Got it. Okay. No, that's really cool. I hadn't heard it framed in a lot of those ways, so appreciate you sharing that. Um, Jim, what, is kind of the best way for folks to follow along with you and, just kind of get more insights into this as people are going throughout their careers? Because, there are a lot of career-based questions, and I feel like that's such an individual-based thing. Like what's a way people can kind of, leverage you as a resource from here?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, we can put my email up. I'm fine. I'm always happy to like talk to people and, give them feedback or insight and just tell them about my journey and things that I've seen. I do have a Instagram. I'm not as good as a lot of people like constantly putting out content. But it's
Yeah.
JK Performance Solutions, and I try to put stuff out there. Maybe this would be a good, jump start for me to put stuff out there if people really
Yeah.
want to listen to listen to what I have to say. I mean, I try to keep it. My whole thing is like I don't want to just put stuff out there like my best athletes doing their best exercises. Like nobody
Yeah.
cares about that. But if people have coaching questions or whatever, but I'm always open for a phone call or a conversation and trying to help this people get better and help this field get better. So I really don't mind sharing my email with people and they can reach out to me.
Love that, man. I appreciate it. And one thing for your guys' knowledge is Jim was, gracious enough to share some programming that we have live on Bridge now. Do you want to talk about that program for a second? Just kind of give people an idea of what it is. Probably better you do it than I.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I would say when we first, got exposed to Bridge, for me, it was huge because at that time for our summer and winter workouts, I would sit there and I'd have a Microsoft Word document with a cover page, and then I'd have a calendar publisher document, and then I'd have my program on an Excel file, then I would have all my exercise descriptions on another document. I have to print all these things out,
Yeah,
staple
too
them.
much.
It was, and you know what? Every kid would just go home and throw that in the corner anyways, and not even really ever look at it again. And so when I saw that, hey, there's an app on their phone that I could put all of this stuff on there with the videos, with all the loading parameters, sets and reps, that was like a done deal for me. Like we need to go forward with this. And I'll be honest with you, some of our sport coaches, excuse me, weren't 100% bought in initially, but when they also learned that we could send this to our committed kids and give them programs before they even get here, and we had the
Hmm.
branding and the logos and all that,
Big deal.
that was a huge for us, and we quickly adopted Bridge as our entire department. And so the program I put on there is a baseball summer workout where you can see some of the mobility stuff, the movements, the strength training stuff. That's my goal with a summer workout is very high volume. Keep it simple in the sense of like they're all going to have access to different facilities. Some of them will have their high school facilities. Some of them will be training at some performance center. Giving them a workout they can do anywhere that's um, not it's definitely difficult. It's not easy, but it's not complex. I also want to make sure they're not doing stuff that I'm not comfortable with them not doing. But you can see like just some of the warm up and speed progressions and those type of things for what we're doing here for our off season stuff with our baseball guys,
Yeah.
whether they're in the Cape or whether they're down the street or whatever. And so, uh,
Yeah. Well, that's huge, man. I mean, I really appreciate that. I think one of the, in kind of figuring out, what we wanted to do with this episode and just talking to folks is it feels like there's it's like Fort Knox trying to get some information, out of the collegiate setting to kind of the rest of the broader training community at times. And, just want to say thank you so much for making that available. I think, the only way we push the industry forward is by being generous with a lot of that content and a lot of that stuff. So thanks for putting that together and really sincerely appreciate that.
yeah, and I appreciate just being able to be a voice for our industry because I think that I think a lot of times we get um, looked at in a different lens because um, things that we're doing, but I think that it's a very interesting, like I said, sphere where they are still practicing. We are dealing with sport coaches. We're dealing with trainers. We're dealing with injuries. It's not just coming to us for a 10-week off season and that's all they're doing. And we're controlling
Yeah.
all their variables. They're 18 to 22-year-old kids, so they're living college student life on top of this as well. They have limited resources, a lot of these kids, for food and for housing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you have 40 athletes at the same time with all these training ages. So that's a real skill set and challenge for a lot of young strength coaches is checking all these boxes, doing all the things we just talked about in a very limited time under the guise of a sport coach as well. So
Hmm.
I would just say that, uh, I love this profession, but it's easy to judge it from the outside and not really knowing all the restrictions that we have and we
Oh
have to
yeah.
deal with year round.
Yeah. I mean, I relate it to, being in the Marine Corps, kind of like, Marine Corps relative to Army, relative to Air Force, like, they've got the worst gear, they have the least amount of manpower, least amount of resources, but like, nevertheless, you got to find a way to get shit done, right?
Yeah,
And I feel like that's the reality of most strength coaches, is you don't have everything you want to have. It's not the perfect environment, but it never will be. Right.
right.
So you have to kind of surrender to, that reality and learn to live in the chaos, which is something, over the course of this episode, I think you know how to do that better than a lot of folks. And my biggest takeaway, today was definitely just like being calm, being, just really getting the underlying resources to know what to do in the weight room is, probably the most important thing a young strength coach can do. And, that way you can be the most focused on getting the best result out of your athletes and, putting the ego aside. Like I think you do that better than probably a lot of people, man. So really, really grateful for your time today.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Cool. Excellent. On that note, we'll wrap up for the day, folks. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, cooper@bridgeathletic.com. You can follow me at delta5performance.com. Unracked is something that evolves over time. We've got a lot of different structures to these episodes and a lot of different types of content we want to play with, but ultimately we want to make sure that you, the live attendees, and the people that register for this are, being heard, and that you guys have some say in how we develop the show moving forward. So Jim, thank you so much for being in here. This was an incredible episode. This will be on YouTube soon, and the recording will be sent out soon. And if you guys want to check out Bridge to get on that program Jim put together, we'll do that. But thank you so much, and we'll end on that note. Take care, Jim. Have a good one.
Thanks. Appreciate it.